Welcome everyone to this ESHRE webinar organized by the ESHRE Special Interest Group Embryology. So the title of the webinar is How to Write an Abstract, and indeed the idea is to help you to write your abstract for the upcoming ESHRE abstract deadline submission, which is on the 1st of February, so it's soon approaching. So we are here with Dr. Roger Sturmey. Roger, you are Senior Lecturer of Reproductive Medicine at New York Medical School, and you're also Basic Science Officer of ESHRE Special Interest Group Embryology. So before giving the floor to Roger, I just wanted to let you know that there's a Q&A chat box where you can add all the questions that are occurring to you during this webinar. We will try to take a couple of questions at the end of the presentation, but if some questions remain unanswered, we will make our best to create a list with written answers. And also another point, we have a survey that is going to be sent to you, and if you could please answer this survey, it would help us improve what we're trying to do with those series of webinars. So Roger, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christine, and thank you all for attending this webinar. I'm very humbled to be giving this. I'm also, I have to confess, a little bit terrified as I've never done a webinar before, so please bear with me. I'm speaking to you today from my home, which is just outside the city of York in the UK. It's a crisp, clear day here, although very, very cold. That is good though, because it is focusing my mind on being able to be focused to tell you about my tips and how to write an abstract. But I would say that this is not just my own tips. I've taken some advice from some friends and colleagues who will remain nameless, but who you will all have heard of. They're senior research and clinical colleagues from across the world, and I asked them to give me some ideas of what they think makes a good abstract, and more importantly, what they think makes a bad abstract. And they're coming at it from the point of view as an abstract reviewer. And we'll talk about that and we'll consider those towards the end. So I'm going to talk to you for hopefully around about 25 minutes, and we're going to consider the purpose of an abstract. And I think it's really helpful for you to understand why you're writing your abstract. And then give you some tips and things to think about before you start writing your abstract. And then when you actually sit down to start doing the writing, how does that work? What do you need to do to make that process happen? And I'm going to talk about something that I call the after writing. And you'll see what I mean when we get there. Some ideas and tips of things not to do whilst you're preparing your abstract. And then, as I said, I'll give you some indications from colleagues from around the world who have answered the statements good abstracts are and bad abstracts are. And you can agree or disagree, but importantly, remember these are the kinds of people that will be reviewing your work. We'll finish off with some top tips and a summary, but I really want you to help me prepare the summary. Now, I have experimented before and I'm going to experiment again, and I hope this works. If you have an internet-enabled device alongside you, a telephone or a tablet, grab a hold of it, open up your browser, your web browser, and go to the website menti.com. Once you've found that website, you will be invited to enter a code, and there's a code, the code is 463728. And please don't worry if you don't catch all of this information immediately, because it is on the bottom of all of my slides. And once you enter that website, you will be asked to write up to 3 ideas of what you think makes a good abstract. And you can answer those questions at any point through this presentation, and at the end we'll generate, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll generate a word cloud of what you, the participants, think makes a good abstract. So it's a bit of mutual learning and a bit of indication of what you actually already know. So let's get on. What is an abstract? Because it's quite an abstract term if you think about it. Really, it's a short, condensed summary of a piece of work. Usually, that is a piece of research, and usually that is novel research. So if you think about what the abstract is, it is that exact idea. It's that short condensation of a piece of work. Now, abstracts for conferences are the only real part of the work that people will see until you are at the meeting. Of course, if you're writing an abstract for a paper, that is often the only part of the work that people will really see. How many of us, and I confess, really just read the abstract of a paper before making a decision? So a good abstract is really the hook. It's the thing that's going to get people interested in what you have to say. In terms of a conference abstract, it's often your first publication. So great, well done, congratulations, you've done a great job. And as I mentioned, your abstract is your means of communicating to the community before the meeting. And that is key. That is absolutely the main purpose of your abstract. So it's a short, succinct piece of work that you should be proud of. Yeah? And it is that hook. It's that thing that people are going to read either before the meeting or on the morning of the meeting, or as they're wandering around, what do I want to go and see? What do I want to go and learn about? Which poster do I want to see? Which presenter do I want to talk to? The abstract of a conference is usually the only part of the work that is published. Crucially, the only part of the work that is available to delegates before the presentation, and also the only part of the work that is available to the reviewers. So your abstract is having to do multiple jobs. It's having to get past the reviewers, so where it will be assessed, and we'll talk about the review process shortly. It's having to attract the delegates. It's having to appeal to the people that you want to share your work with. And it has to stand the test of time because it is published, so people can go back and refer to it. So those are the general considerations of what an abstract is and what it's for. Let's think about the idea that where you are now. We are in the 13th of December. You have around about 7-8 weeks with a small holiday in between to write your abstracts for the ESHRE meeting. So hopefully you're thinking about that now. Before you start writing your abstract, before you sit in front of your computer, ask yourself this very honest question. Do you have something to report? Have you conducted a study? Have you done a piece of research? And do you have some results? And universally, the comment that came back from the colleagues that I asked was about the things that they hate seeing in abstracts are abstracts with no data, abstracts with no findings, or where you have these statements that say the data from this study will be presented. Those abstracts are rarely going to be accepted for ESHRE and many other societies these days. People want to see what you have done, not what you hope you might be able to have ready by the time the meeting comes around. The next question to ask yourself, have you submitted it and published it already? Content should be original. It should be unpublished. You shouldn't be presenting the same abstract and the same piece of work at multiple international meetings. The slight exception there is if you are an invited speaker, and that therefore usually doesn't require an abstract. There is a small caveat to this. Have you submitted it and published it already? If you have submitted an abstract, based on a piece of work that is part of a larger study that is under review for a full publication, that is usually considered to be okay. That is usually considered to be acceptable. But the work as it stands should not have been in the public domain and presented or published previously. The next question to ask, did you do a piece of research? That might sound like a really strange question to ask, but really audits are usually not accepted. So you really have to be asking, have you generated some new knowledge? Have you generated some new understanding? Have you got something that might change, improve, or inform practice or understanding of colleagues across the society? I've put here that opinions are usually not accepted, and abstracts based purely on opinion is rarely going to be accepted. And I will caveat that by saying that there are certain areas of research, I'm thinking more of the social sciences, where opinions are important, but they have to be evidence-based and backed up with independent, verifiable facts. Essentially, what you need to be able to answer to these questions at the end, you need to be able to have the confidence that you have conducted a strong, clear piece of research that answers a question and that you've conducted well. Goes back to that idea of being proud of the abstract that you present. So if the answer to those questions is yes, I've got something to report, no, I haven't published it already, yes, I did do a piece of research and it was a strong, clear research question, then it's time to start preparing your abstract. So the writing. I could stop this presentation here by simply saying, check the guidelines. ESHRE have some fantastic guidelines, and the link is here for how to write a structured abstract. Now I'm going to let you into a little confession. When I first saw the ESHRE structured abstract, I wasn't convinced. However, I very quickly had my mind changed on that, because the structured abstracts make it very simple, not only to write the abstracts, but also to assess them, to review them, and to read them. So let's look at the ESHRE structured abstract. The first part is the title. In some ways, the title is the only part. It's the most important part of the abstract, because when you have the high number of abstracts submitted that come to an ESHRE meeting, most people will scan the titles. Does that grab me? Is that in my area? Is that something I want to read about? So carefully about your title. A good title will really tell the reader what the study is about and what the study has shown. The title, the word count of the title is restricted. We don't want titles that go on for 14 pages. So 25 words maximum is a good target, and that is where you should be able to really grab your reader. It's the headline. It's the piece that you want to get those people interested with. The next part is the study question. What was the question that you set out to answer? If we think about the scientific method, we consider a question, we set a hypothesis, we test, we observe, we make an assessment as to whether we've proven or disproven our hypothesis on the basis of the results. So what is the question that your piece of research has set out to answer? Then you give us the answer. Again, 25 words, a brief, short, succinct summary of what that piece of research has shown. At this point, you can start to talk about the background. What is known already? You have 100 words to set the scene of your research. What has gone previously? What has led to you feeling that the research question that you have answered is important? Then you need to tell us how you did it. What was the study design? How did you conduct your research? Was it a clinical study? Was it a basic study? How big was the study? How long did the study go on for? You have to condense that into 75 words maximum. The next section is how you did the study. Who were the participants? What materials did you use? What was the setting? Was it a clinical setting? Was it a laboratory setting? Was it an observational type of study? And how you actually did the work, the methods. The next part is possibly the body, the bulk of the work. What were the results? What did you show? You've got 200 words to describe your data, and also consider the role of chance. How confident are you that your data show what you expect, what you want them, or what you interpret them to show? The limitations, reasons, and cautions section can actually be quite a challenge to write, because it's very difficult to our own work. However, you know your study better than anybody else, and therefore, by inference, you will know what limitations you were bound by. Every piece of research has its limitations, and there is nothing wrong with that. What is important is to understand, to highlight them, and to address them. And this is your opportunity to talk about those limitations of the study and the reasons for caution. And then finally, you finish off by saying, what are the wider implications of your work? Thinking back to what is known already, or what was known previously, how does your work add to the body of knowledge? The last two sections, first of all, we ask you to declare your study funding and any competing interests. And if you've conducted a trial, we ask for the trial registration number. Now, that is quite a structured way of piece of writing, but it's also a structured piece of reading. Because if you think about the order in which these sections run, the title is the first part that's going to grab the reader. If the title grabs me, then we'll look at the study question. If the study question is of interest, I want to know what you've done. Now, arguably, I could stop here and know what the point of your research was, what the main message was. But if I really want to know more, then I can read in depth what is known already, what was the study design, and really make an informed decision as to whether I want to come and see you at the meeting. So really, the important thing is to get those key messages in those early stages of the abstract. So let's consider the writing. When you sit and write, you need to think of a number of things. It's quite difficult. You need to think about the category that you're going to submit your abstract to. ESHRE asks you to declare whether it's basic or clinical, but also the area of interest. And with that, you're thinking about your audience. Who do you want to read your work? Is it practitioners? Is it clinicians? Is it embryologists? Is it scientists? Because that can also help you shape the style and substance of your work. Now it's time to start writing, or I would say plan the writing. And you can draft it. How you approach your drafting is really an individual process. You may wish to do a mind map where you just draw pictures and put ideas on the page. You may wish to make notes. What can be really helpful is writing a single summary sentence of the work. That really can help you focus and return back to what I did and what I've shown. Your results have to be clear. They have to be easy for the reader to digest. And they begin with the findings. If your findings are, if your study was a good study, the results will be clear. And then it's time to get started. One top tip I would give you, I give everybody that I talk to about writing, nobody sees the first draft of your work. Nobody sees any draft of your work until you let them see it. So don't feel ashamed to get started, and don't beat yourself up if your first draft isn't quite how you imagined it. Just write. Because this slide shows, in my opinion, the scariest sight for any writer, the blank page. Sometimes you just have to get going. Just start writing. And the structured abstract that ESHRE uses is a really good way to avoid this blank page phenomenon. You have questions, you have sections. Approach them individually. The second part of the writing, do you have something to report? Remember, negative results are fine. Negative results can be really important because they stop people going down the same blind alleys. But no results are not. So as I've illustrated already, abstracts that say that results will be presented or results are ongoing, studies are ongoing, are usually unlikely to be accepted. Once you've written your abstract, read it back and ask if your study is clear and understandable. Have you clearly described the experimental design? And have you told us how many times you've done it? And have you appropriately analysed and tested your data? Now that can be analysis in terms of a biochemical analysis or a molecular analysis, but also the statistical analysis and the data interpretation. So when should you start? I would say start as early as you can. The abstract deadline for ESHRE is the 1st of February. I would say start drafting now if you can. You really do want to be in a position, wherever possible, to have your data or your findings gathered before you start writing. That will make the process much more structured and much more simple. To be honest, it's a little bit late to start thinking of a project in January if you hope to submit an abstract for ESHRE in February. Usually research takes a little bit longer than that, so it does take a little bit of pre-planning. But remember, the longer you spend on the work, particularly your writing, the better it will be. And that is true for everybody, regardless of how many times people have written abstracts or papers. The longer you spend on it, the better it will be. Let's move on to the after writing. Proofread it. Does it make sense? And when I say proofread it, read it aloud. Now, that might sound really strange, and it may feel very foreign, but read it aloud. Does it sound like you want it to read? And that goes back to that starting early. Give yourself plenty of time to proofread it. Circulate it to all of your co-authors. You really should be doing that anyway, because if you have co-authors, they are invested in that work as much as you are. So circulate it and give them enough time to read it. The night before the deadline is probably not going to get very constructive feedback. And also check the language and the structure. Now, this is a slight embarrassment of mine, but the language of science is English. And if English isn't your first language, it really is worth trying to find a native speaker, a friendly native speaker, to check your abstract. Even if they don't understand the work, just to check the language and the structure. The submission. There is a deadline. We've mentioned it a number of times now. It's the 1st of February 2019. That's the deadline. Wherever possible, try and submit early. There's nothing like a deadline to focus the mind. or to stress you out. So try and submit early to give yourself time for any unexpected events. Something to think about. Quite a wordy slide here, but your abstract is going to be reviewed by quite a small panel of reviewers. And they review those abstracts in their spare time. Often for ESHRE, reviewers will have more than 100 abstracts to review. Try and be kind to your reviewer. Make it easy to read. When I've read 77 abstracts and I come to the 78th abstract and it's 1 AM in the morning and I'm tired and I have to go to work the next day, if I have to read a sentence 4 times to understand it, I'm not going to look terribly favourably on that abstract. So try and make your work easy to read. Think of the reader. Make their job easier. It's more likely to have a favourable outcome. Let's look at that review process. Here we've got the data of the number of abstracts submitted for the past 5 ESHRE meetings. And you can see a clear increase in the number of abstracts up to 2018, where more than 1,900 abstracts were submitted. But look at those numbers of abstracts that are submitted. Accepted. Around about 50 to 60% of abstracts are accepted, which means 40 to 50% are not. To maximise your chance of having an abstract accepted, make sure you have something to talk about. Make sure it's clear. Make sure it's accessible. Make sure it's readable. One question that certainly students of mine often ask is, how do I get to give a talk? How do I make my abstract hit the talk category? Well, there's limited time in the programme. There's a limited number of abstracts that can be selected for talks. And as the number of abstracts increases, the number of posters that can be selected for an oral presentation decreases. So really, all you can do is submit your best work and hope that it's of interest and it's topical and it's timely, and you're prepared, if invited, to give that oral presentation. However, the thing about an oral presentation is you only give it. If people aren't in that room when you give it, they've missed it. Whereas a poster, people can access it at their own time. So these things to think about. Your abstract will be reviewed, but not all of them will be accepted. I've mentioned a couple of times now, your abstract is the only part of the work that will be seen by the reviewers and by the readers. So make it effective, make it clear. And answer this question. If it's accepted, can you go to present it? Because by submitting an abstract as a lead author, you make the commitment to going to present the work. Let's consider some things not to do. What should you not do when writing an abstract? Well, don't include figures, tables, images, or graphs. They usually do not feature in abstracts, and they often distract the reader. They also make formatting the abstract proceedings very difficult. The point of an abstract is it is a short, succinct piece of writing. So describe your findings. Use your words. Another top tip. Don't use too many abbreviations, and if you do, make sure you expand them on first use. Give you an example. Following OVP, we did IVM after ICSI IVF. After IVP, we did HPLC, LCM, SMS, FLIM, FLAP, FRAP, FLIPPed, using an LCSM to look at depletion appearance of R, I, Q, W, and Y. I'm hoping some of you are finding that slightly amusing. But what this essentially is a way of writing something very succinctly, but actually it's mostly unintelligible. What I've actually described here is a piece of work where we've done some microscopy and looked at the depletion of some amino acids. Also, try not to wait until that last moment to submit your abstract. So I said I was going to tell you about what a good abstract is from independent experts. Now this again is a very wordy slide because these are direct quotes. Good abstract. Well, one of my colleagues said the title key ensures a sentence message. A good abstract is precisely and tightly written, with every word counting. Your opening context, a description of your methods, with results with good statistical support, and ending with a significant sentence. Think about that structured abstract that ESHRE uses, follows that route. Good abstracts cover all aspects of the study concisely, and they can be digested by pretty much any scientist. A good abstract actually has the answer in the title. It doesn't overinterpret or extrapolate the conclusions. It's got the right balance of detail, but it clearly states the problem under investigation. I'm hoping you've seen some common threads here. A valid research question, clearly defined outcome. Clearly laid out. This reviewer likes to see PICO, patient intervention, control, and outcome. What is the type of hypothesis? Do the results support the conclusion? A good abstract is one that has a single clear sentence hypothesis or research question, which is clearly answered in the discussion or conclusion. The structured ESHRE abstracts will help you achieve these types of things. By contrast, what is a bad abstract? Well, one reviewer said, I hate seeing abstracts with no data, sample size, or statistical comparisons. A weak abstract misses out significant sections, has too much detail, too much jargon, and doesn't say why the study is important. Abstracts that start with the effects of X were studied. This reviewer believes that indicates there was no clear hypothesis, and that idea of a hypothesis and a research question keeps coming back. A weak abstract alludes to work that has yet to be done, but will be done in time for presentation. Have your data ready when you're writing your abstract. And also has spelling or grammatical errors. Make it easy. Weak abstract is typically characterized by making bold claims about the data rather than just sticking to the job of interpreting the study. Lacks any results. There's no basis given for the study, no reason for doing the work. Often a possible absence of full declaration of ethical approval. Poorly written, with no logical hypothesis, fails to use appropriate statistical testing of data. Bad abstract is exactly the opposite of a good abstract. So think about those sections, think about those ideas. So we're coming to the end. Top tips. Make sure you've got a story to tell. Make sure you have some results to present and you have some data to talk about. And then describe it clearly. Give yourself the time to have a draft and make iterative changes to improve it, to make it as clear as it can be. Check the guidelines. The ESHRE guidelines are very clear, but for whatever conference you're attending, there are always guidelines outlining what they're expecting, what the reviewers are expecting in the abstract. Check it, and then check it again, and then get somebody else to check it. Your co-authors, your supervisors, trusted friends. Then check it again, proofread it. Does it make sense? Does it tell what you want it to tell? When you've completed those steps, you're ready to submit. So I don't know whether we've done this word cloud, but I'm hoping to try and see how many of you have answered the question of what you think makes a good abstract. I hope you can see my screen because it's pretty clear what makes a good abstract. It is clear, it is concise, it's novel, it's informative. But look at those dominant words, clear and concise. Clear and concise. The only thing I'd like to do now is to end this presentation by thanking you for your attention and also thanking Tizia and Christine at ESHRE for making this happen. My colleagues on the SIG Embryology, Giovanni Coticchio, Susanna Apta, Yanis Fontouris, Debbie Mongeon, Monica Marquez, Yves Gunn, and Leonie van der Hoven for helping me prepare this presentation, and also the anonymous reviewers across the world. But I have two acknowledgements there. One, the anonymous reviewers from across the world who helped me prepare this abstract, but also the anonymous reviewers that give their time to read our work, assess it, and help us make it better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger, indeed. So if you can stay with us, apparently your presentation was extremely clear because we only have one question for you.
Okay.
So I'm going to read it to you. Just a second. How to present a peculiar case study, especially if that peculiar scenario is never observed before. I'm
sorry. It just pixelated then, Christine. Could you just repeat that again? I'm going to jot it down so I can make sure I understand it.
Of course. How to present a peculiar case study, especially if that peculiar scenario is never observed before.
that's a tricky one for me to consider, but I think what's really going to be crucial is to give an appropriate background. So what is that case study describing? What is the underlying phenomenon that has been seen? And if there's no examples of it before, a review of what may be related or what may be similar to it that has led this to be something that needs to be described. And then it's a case of being clear and concise. What was the case study? What was observed? What does it mean? How do you interpret the observations from that case study? And what does it mean for the wider community? I think that's the best thing that you can do. It really, I mean, these are very difficult ones to present, but can be very important. But really answering that question yourself as the reviewer, is it a genuine observation? Is it something novel? Is it something new? Is it something that is genuinely unreported? And are there those confounders, are those conflicting interests? So could there be other explanations for the observation? So it's really about trying to consider the observation as broadly as possible. Is what I would say as a reviewer.
So another question in the follow-up of the previous one, if you are typing systematic review, would you approach the same way, or is there anything you would like to add?
For a systematic review, I think with the systematic review, there are a number of parallels. I'm going to go back through the slides, but there are a number of parallels. So let's go back to the slide that looks at the layout. A systematic review will have a title. A systematic review will be assessing a study question and will lead to a summary answer. There will be the background that's led to that systematic review, and then it's crucial to describe how that systematic review has been conducted. Does it adhere to the appropriate guidelines? What were the results of the systematic review? Again, it can be summarized in using words, and then the limitations and the reasons of caution. Of course, when you're describing the methods of systematic review, it's crucial to include the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And then what were the wider implications? What does that systematic review mean? What does it reveal? What does it tell us that we didn't already know? So I think I would actually, when it comes to writing the abstract, I think I would be quite comfortable in approaching it using the ESHRE structure.
Right. Two more questions, and then I think we will have to close the webinar. How do I write the hypothesis in an abstract?
Well, it's a statement. A hypothesis is a statement. In the ESHRE abstract, it does request a question, so you convert your hypothesis into the study question. But essentially, you should be addressing a hypothesis, and it's not too difficult to rewrite that hypothesis as the study question. I hypothesize that leucine is consumed by embryos, is my hypothesis. My question therefore becomes, do embryos consume leucine? So it's about rephrasing and restructuring those words to set it into a question. The hypothesis can be considered in the study, can be returned to in the study design if necessary, but remember, every word counts, and there aren't many words to describe your work.
Fine. And the last one, can I shorten the manuscript to create abstract, or do I need to modify it a lot?
Pardon me, can you shorten a manuscript?
Yes. Can I shorten a manuscript? Yeah.
Okay, if you're shortening a manuscript, presumably you're talking about a manuscript draft that has not been published, because if the manuscript has been published, then it won't be eligible to be accepted as an abstract. But if you have a manuscript and you can shorten it, by all means. As a rule of thumb, for my personally as a research scientist and a research supervisor, I tend to think of an abstract containing roughly half the amount of work as a full paper. So I approach full manuscripts as having 6 to 7 figures of data. So an abstract will be requiring 3 to 4 pieces of data. So oftentimes it may be worth looking at your manuscript and really making a decision about what are the essential parts that should be summarized in your abstract.
Fine. So I think we're going to keep it here for now. We received other questions in the chat box, and also a lot of thank you for you, Roger, for your great presentation. So thank you very much. Don't forget to, for the participants, don't forget to complete the survey to let us know your views on this webinar. And yeah, thank you for participating. Goodbye. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.